It's a beautiful day outside, which got me thinking. Here's the thing about HEMA and fencing and these treatises. In the grand scheme of things, these things don't actually matter. So, how many treatises have we got? Like, we're taking into account surviving treatises around the world. A couple of hundred. If we have the ones that we take into account that no longer exist, maybe 1,000, couple of thousand. They don't really pale much in comparison to other works which may or may not have existed. The ones which currently do, the more existential ones, the Bible, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, Confucius. There's a ticking sound. All of this stuff exists in many, many copies. Ancient philosophers, the letters of Cicero, the writings of Plato and Aristotle, Copernicus, Machiavelli. All of these stuff were emphasized, written, and transcribed consistently, even before the Gutenberg press and the modern printing press. And even then, after the printing press, we see where the priority of text lie. What does that tell us? That in the grand scheme of things, these treatises don't really matter. And they don't matter precisely because they're not really, in the grand scheme of things, that important. Now, we look at what these treatises do, even if we take into account the military treatises, and they teach us how to fight. They might give us some philosophical outlooks. Miyamoto Musashi, the Book of the Void, or more accurately, the Book of the Air, if you go by an actual translation, and not a really embellished one. I might make a video about that, about Miyamoto Musashi's Book of the Five Rings and how embellished it is, because the translation de facto doesn't really add up in that way. But if we look at it, these really don't tell you much other than how to inflict violence upon another person. And it's no coincidence that a lot of these treatises, like the German KDF, began to arrive as middle-class activities to be done in free time when the lines are blurred. But for people like the Romans, we have indications of treatises that just don't exist anymore. Cato the Younger or Elder had a military treatise that Vegetius used. The Strategicon of Morris had an infantry second part of a treatise which no longer survives. The point I'm trying to make is that in the grand scheme of prioritization and what's important to human existence, swords are fun. They're great. Talking about knights slamming maces into each other is really fun to read. But they never really got us where we needed to be now, if that makes sense. And the fact that certain works have survived in much larger volumes, and comparatively all the works that aren't non-combat, martial or military related are far more extensive and heavy compared to the stuff on military writing and treatises, really brings into perspective just how much it just, in the grand scheme of things, doesn't matter. It's fighting with a halberd, fun, and sword, fun. Yeah, it's pretty fun. It's really nice. It speaks to us as a species because whether we like it or not, we partially like violence and getting it gripped and grappling somebody and beating them up in a recreational environment as a plane. But in terms of the grand scheme of things, higher questions, it's a plane over my house. Who could have let this happen? Who could have let this this ordeal happen. Anyway, of all the things that could have been done in an environment that obtain higher learning and purposes and talk about higher reasoning and philosophy and, you know, an understanding of metaphysics, you would think that that stuff is far more important. And that's kind of the most important thing, right? Things happen, things rise, things fall, things become, people discover stuff, but people, like, we've lost a lot of works, like Diogenes, the philosopher, the one who said, "Behold, a featherless biped," and it was a chicken. We have the sophists, the Stoics. A lot of that stuff is just lost, and we don't have it. And that understanding, in terms of philosophical understanding, could have been far more better if we had surviving works of those, compared to the stuff we have now, because it was all the preferences of Eastern Roman, e.g. Byzantine scholars, who decided to discard works and incorporate works which existed, and the birds are singing, hello. But the point I'm trying to make, which I've been regurgitating consistently, hello, is it this camera? It's this camera, right? The point I'm trying to make is that in the grand scheme of things, like, you can see where the emphasis in human reason and existence lies. Because if there are far more Bibles and far more philosophical works which have survived, which were emphasized, it shows where the priorities lie. It shows what's important in life. Doesn't mean fencing doesn't need to be fun, and it's not fun reconstructing, but you kind of look at it and you kind of conclude after the extent that on a surface level it's very fulfilling and fun, but there's more important things in life. Maybe we should use this as a thought experiment and think about that. So anyway, just a thought experiment. In the grand scheme of maybe a couple of thousand books, the things which are regarded as far more higher, philosophically, spiritually, are in the tens of thousands, likely, even if we take into account all the stuff which no longer exists. So there, something to think about. Bye bye.